Now, last but not least, to conclude that if statement part, I want to introduce the switch case statement, which is a new statement, but kind of related to if statements. It's great in situations like this, where you have multiple equality checks, because that's where it really shines and where it is the most helpful, where you want to execute different code based on the condition that was met. Now, you can also use switch case statements with other conditions where you don't check for equality, but there you save less code and they often are harder to read. So you typically use switch case statements, or you can use them as a replacement for if-else if statements with a lot of else if cases if you always check for equality and you're just checking multiple different values. So let me show you how you could translate this long block of if and else if blocks into a switch case statement. For that, you use the switch keyword, which is built into JavaScript, and the switch keyword doesn't take a condition, but it takes a value, a single value. So in this case, the event. Then you add curly braces and no semicolon after them. And then you can add the case keyword to define a case. The case now is a concrete value that could be stored in this variable or constant, or in this case, parameter. So for example, here, log event player attack. Of course, you don't have to use a constant here which holds the value. You could hard code it in here. Doesn't have to be a string either. You could be looking for a number. But by default, this looks for equality here. Now, if you're interested in some ideas of how you could use a switch case statement with greater than and so on, you will find resources attached to this video. But this is the most straightforward way of using it, the easiest to read way, the way for which it was invented, I would say, and the way where I would use it. If you have other conditions that include more complex conditions, greater than, and so on, or combined conditions, I would always go for an if statement. If you have an if statement like this, though, where you always have only one condition and you check for equality, then a switch case statement might be an idea. So how do you use it? You see I added a colon after this case definition, and then typically in a new line, you define which code should be executed if this case is met. So if EV has a value of log event player attack. Also worth pointing out that behind the scenes, switch always uses the triple equal sign operator to compare that. So it only will go into that case if the event holds log event player attack, both regarding the value but also the type. So if event really is a string in this case, because that's what's stored in log event player attack. So now we have that case defined. Now we define the code that should be executed if that is the case. So in this case, I want to adjust my log entry target. And then you can define a second case. In this case, a case here that the value stored in EV is log event player strong attack. And then again, colon, and then the code that should execute. So either you again just manipulate the target, or as I do it down there, you create a brand new object which you store in log entry. Now, very important, you also should add another special keyword after each case, and that's the break keyword followed by a semicolon. Now, we haven't seen the break keyword before. It's a keyword built into JavaScript. And in the end, what it tells JavaScript is that if that case has been handled, no other case should be handled. Because by default, switch case statements do something which is called fall through, which means if you made it into that case, then that case would be executed as well. Because the default behavior is actually that if it made it into a case, it will also execute the cases below it automatically, even if these don't match the value. Sometimes this is exactly what you want. Sometimes you want to have the same code for multiple cases, and you could achieve that by not defining any code for a case. Then, thanks to that fall through mechanism, if this case is met, it goes right to the next case and executes this code. But in other cases, you only really want to execute one piece of code for each case, and then you add the break keyword to tell JavaScript, after this is finished, don't evaluate any other cases, just leave the switch case statement, we are done. So now let's also add break here, and then, again, add another case, and that would be the log event monster attack. So let's add this here, and thereafter that code which we had in this else if block. and then add yet another case here. Now here for the player heal. So let's add that here. Also, don't forget the break statement here. I did forget it, so make sure you don't. So log event player heal. There, of course, I'll grab this code, which I have down there in the else if block, add it here below case, and add the break keyword, and then add the last case, and that's our event game over. So let's add that here, whoops, like this. Also, of course, copy the code we have down there, add it here, and maybe also add break here. Of course, here though you could omit it because we have no other case below it. Now in switch case statements, you also have another special keyword, and that's default, followed by a colon. That allows you to define some default code in case no case is met, and therefore you make it into no entry point here. Then you would add default to still execute some code, maybe in case no other case is met. So here we could set a log entry to an empty object, for example. Now, of course, that means that now I can comment out the if-else if statement here and just keep my battle log push code line. And with that, we have a valid switch case statement. Now, is that better than if and else if? Well, if you have such strict equality comparisons, it can be a bit cleaner to read, and therefore it's a real alternative, which I tend to prefer. But ultimately, you can also stick to if-else if you prefer that, if you find that easier to read. And especially if you have more complex conditions, multiple combined conditions, or greater than checks and so on, you definitely want to use if, else blocks and statements instead of the switch case statement, because that really only shines for strict equality checks.